Society has a very simple story for people who cut off their family. They are cold. They are ungrateful. They are selfish. They are dramatic. They are the ones who walked away. But psychology tells a much more uncomfortable story, because sometimes the person who leaves the family is not the one destroying the family. Sometimes they are the first person who stopped pretending it was healthy. And through a Jungian lens, this matters deeply. Because Carl Jung understood that families do not only pass down names, traditions, and genetics. They pass down silence. They pass down shame. They pass down roles. They pass down shadows. And sometimes the person called the black sheep is not the problem. Sometimes the black sheep is the only one telling the truth. Jung believed every person carries a shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is the part of the self we refuse to face, the emotions we deny, the memories we bury, the traits we pretend belong only to other people. But families have shadows too. A family shadow is made of everything the family system refuses to acknowledge: the addiction everyone excuses, the cruelty everyone minimizes, the neglect everyone calls strength, the favoritism everyone pretends does not exist, the emotional abuse that gets renamed as discipline, the manipulation that gets renamed as love, the parent who is never questioned, the child who is always blamed. And in many families, everyone learns the rules without anyone saying them out loud. Do not talk about what happened. Do not challenge the person with power. Do not embarrass the family. Do not name the pain. Do not make anyone uncomfortable with the truth. And most importantly, do not become more conscious than the system allows, because in a dysfunctional family, awareness is treated like betrayal, not because awareness is wrong, but because awareness threatens the story everyone else depends on. Every family system has roles. There is often the golden child, the one who carries the family's pride. There is the fixer, the one who manages everyone else's emotions. There is the invisible child, the one who learned not to need too much. There is the caretaker, the peacekeeper, the responsible one. And then there is the scapegoat, the one who gets blamed for the tension the family refuses to understand. The scapegoat is often told, "You are too sensitive. You are too emotional. You are difficult. You always cause problems. You cannot let things go." But sometimes what the family calls sensitivity is actually perception. Sometimes the so-called difficult person is simply the one who notices the contradiction. They notice when love comes with control. They notice when apologies never include change. They notice when the family demands loyalty but offers no safety. And because they notice, they become dangerous. Not because they are trying to destroy the family, but because their awareness interrupts the illusion. This is why the scapegoat often becomes the first person to wake up, not because they wanted the role, not because they enjoyed being blamed, but because pain forced them to pay attention. When you are constantly misunderstood, you start studying people. You study tone. You study silence. You study the shift in someone's face before they deny what they just did. You learn to feel the temperature of a room before anyone speaks. And over time, this becomes perception. You begin to see the hidden machinery of the family. Who is allowed to be angry? Who is allowed to cry? Who must apologize? Who never has to change? Who gets protected? And who gets sacrificed? Jung would say this is where consciousness begins, because the moment you see the role, you are no longer fully trapped inside it. You realize, maybe I was not too sensitive. Maybe I was responding to something real. Maybe the pain I carried was never only mine. And that realization changes everything, because once you stop confusing your assigned role with your identity, you become harder to control. This is the moment many people start questioning the family bond itself. Because once you see the role, you also see the cost of staying inside it. You see how much of your personality was actually adaptation, how much of your silence was survival, how much of your guilt was training, and how much of your loyalty was fear. This is where family estrangement becomes misunderstood. People think cutting off family begins with hatred, but most of the time it begins with exhaustion. It begins after years of explaining, years of forgiving, years of hoping this time would be different, years of walking back into the same room, only to become the same role again. The scapegoat, the fixer, the invisible one, the one who must understand everyone, while no one tries to understand them. And eventually something inside you stops negotiating. Not loudly, not dramatically. Quietly, you stop trying to make unsafe people understand your pain. You stop begging for accountability from people who benefit from avoiding it. You stop confusing access to you with love. And that is when distance begins to feel less like punishment and more like oxygen. Because sometimes leaving is not rejection. Sometimes leaving is the first honest act of self-protection. This is where Jung's idea of individuation becomes important. Individuation is the process of becoming who you actually are, instead of who your family needed you to be. It is not rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It is not becoming cold. It is not deciding that you do not need anyone. It is learning where you end and where the family story begins. Because some of the thoughts in your mind may not be yours. Some of your guilt may be inherited. Some of your fear may be learned. Some of your shame may belong to people who never had the courage to face themselves. And for years, you may have mistaken those voices for your own conscience. But then something shifts. You begin asking different questions. Do I actually believe this? Or was I taught to believe it? Do I actually owe them access to me? Or was I trained to feel guilty when I protect myself? Do I actually miss them? Or do I miss the version of them I kept hoping would appear? This is painful. Because individuation does not only reveal who you are, it also reveals who your family may never become. And that grief is real, but so is the freedom. Because the moment you stop living as an extension of the family wound, you begin becoming a person of your own. This is the part people rarely talk about. Leaving a family system does not always feel like freedom at first. Sometimes it feels like grief. Sometimes it feels like guilt. Sometimes it feels like standing outside a house you survived and still missing the idea of being welcomed inside, because you are not only grieving the people, you are grieving the fantasy, the version of the family you kept hoping would appear, the apology that never came, the conversation that finally made everything clear, the parent who suddenly understood, the sibling who finally admitted what happened, the home that became safe. And when that fantasy dies, it hurts. Even when leaving was necessary, even when distance saved you, even when your body finally feels calmer. Grief can still sit beside relief. Love can still exist beside boundaries. Missing someone does not always mean they should return. And feeling guilty does not always mean you did something wrong. Sometimes guilt is just the echo of an old role, the old training, the old belief that your peace is allowed only when everyone else approves of it. But healing begins when you realize you are allowed to protect yourself before they understand why. You are allowed to choose peace without asking permission from the people who disrupted it. This is where the healing becomes quieter. Because after the first wave of distance, after the anger softens, after the guilt starts losing its power, you begin to notice something unfamiliar: silence. Not the silence of being ignored, not the silence of walking on eggshells, not the silence before someone explodes. A different kind of silence. The kind where your nervous system realizes nobody is coming to pull you back into the old role. Nobody is demanding that you explain yourself for the 100th time. Nobody is asking you to shrink so the family story can stay comfortable. And at first, peace can feel strange. Because if chaos was your childhood language, calm can feel like a foreign country. You may not know what to do with a life that no longer requires constant defense. You may feel bored, restless, even guilty. But this is not emptiness. This is your system learning safety. This is your body discovering that love does not have to arrive with tension. That connection does not have to cost you yourself. That family does not have to mean emotional captivity. And slowly, you begin to rebuild. Not the person they understood, not the role they approved of, but the self that had been waiting underneath all that survival. The self that was never gone, only buried. And this is where chosen family begins to matter. Not as a replacement for the family you lost, not as a fantasy where nobody ever hurts you, but as proof that connection can exist without control. Chosen family may be one friend, one partner, one mentor, one person who lets you be honest without punishing you for it. And at first, that kind of love may feel unfamiliar. You may wait for the hidden cost. You may expect the mood to shift. You may wonder when you will have to earn your place by becoming useful again. Because when love was conditional for too long, unconditional presence can feel suspicious. But slowly, your body begins to learn a new pattern, that you can disagree and still be safe. You can say no and still be loved. You can have needs and still belong. You can be imperfect and not be abandoned. This does not mean every wound disappears. It means your life is no longer organized around the people who wounded you. And that is the real turning point. Not when you stop caring, not when you stop remembering, but when their version of you stops being the center of your identity. You begin to ask, what do I actually want? What feels peaceful to me? What kind of love does not require self-betrayal? And little by little, you stop building your life around survival. You start building it around truth, because healing is not proving your family wrong. Healing is finally becoming real to yourself. And maybe this is the part you needed to hear most. You do not have to hate your family to outgrow the role they gave you. You do not have to erase the good moments to admit the painful ones were real. You do not have to turn your healing into a courtroom, where every memory has to prove its case. Sometimes, the truth is complicated. They may have loved you, and still hurt you. They may have tried their best, and their best may still have damaged you. They may never understand your distance, and your distance may still be necessary. Healing is not about making them villains. It is about finally telling the truth without abandoning yourself, because the child in you may still want the apology. The adult in you may know it may never come, and both parts of you deserve compassion. So if you are walking away, walk away without becoming what hurt you. Walk away with clarity. Walk away with grief. Walk away with boundaries. Walk away with your heart still alive, because the goal is not to become cold. The goal is to become free. Free enough to love without losing yourself. Free enough to remember without returning. Free enough to build a life where peace no longer feels like betrayal. And one day, you may realize something powerful. You did not destroy the family by telling the truth. You broke the silence that was destroying you, and that is not cruelty. That is consciousness. That is healing. That is you finally coming home to yourself. Forward this to someone who is learning to choose peace. Drop the word home in the comments. The thinking space. Follow for more psychology and human behavior.